Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
Dante.
An inmate at the Jackson Correctional Institution. All calls, other than properly placed attorney calls, may be monitored and recorded. To accept charges, press 1. To refuse charges, press 2.
If you would like to permanently block your number from receiving calls from this facility, press
6.
for balance and rate quotes, press
7. Thank you for using
CenturyLink.
You may start the conversation now.
Welcome to the Incarcerate U.S. podcast. I'm your host, Dante Cottingham. This morning I'm speaking to Mr. Marlon Peterson. He is a published writer, a youth program innovator, a trauma expert, a gun violence prevention advocate, a TED talker, and a criminal justice reform advocate that hosts a podcast called Incarcerate. Good morning, Mr. Peterson.
Good morning, Dante. How you doing?
I'm good. I'd like to thank you, man, for taking the time to have this discussion with me.
Yeah, no question. Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out. Appreciate it.
I have some questions I'd like to ask you to get your perspective on some of the components of mass incarceration in America. But before we get to those, let's talk a little bit about decarcerated. What does the term decarcerated mean to you? What is the aim of your podcast, and what inspires you to create it?
Well, yeah, thanks for asking about it. So, the Incarcerated podcast highlights the journeys of success for people who have spent time in jails and prisons across the country. It's almost 70 million people in the world, in America, that are living with a criminal conviction. So it's literally just to we wanted to be able to highlight the levels of resilience through and the success that people have had who have, despite prison. I never say because of, but despite prison. And to see and to give like a really human perspective and face of folks who've, been in jails and prisons like myself and whatnot.
Okay. And what inspires you to, what's the aim?
Well,
what's the mission, and what inspires you to create it? Where does the inspiration come from?
Well, I'm somebody that really relishes and loves to create platforms that amplify the voices of other people. Okay. So with this podcast, and then the work I've been doing since my release over almost 8 years now, we always get these sort of stories, these questions are like, well, what made you different from everybody else, and how were you able to do that, and how are you able to transition from prison to the community? And I'm one of those people that feels like, there's no exceptions. Like, there's so many people across this country who have spent time in prisons, and so there's no one person. So it's really just to amplify these people across the country. It's so that we're not looking at just one person here or one person there, but since there's 70 million people in this country living in criminal conviction, there's millions of people who are success stories, and we just want to get those out there. And success, I like to say, is relative. Success is very relative. It could be somebody successful in academics, their profession, they've come home and they're living a great life, got a job, living with their family, integrated well into society.
Okay, so out of all of the people that you interview, what would you say are some of the most profound things you've learned from the stories of the brothers and sisters that you talked to?
Yeah, the podcast is in its first season. We've had 11 episodes. Okay. And in the people I've interviewed, I think one of the things that stands out to me is that just about everyone, through their own volition, speaks about how other people in prison were catalysts for their change or for their transformation or their evolution as a person, as opposed to when some people would say, well, it's the prison programs that did it, or it was because you needed some time away and that's why you decided to change, etc. And it's really the power of people just being able to interact with folks and to serve as, as I said, as catalysts for transformation. And I think that's a reoccurring story that I've heard people give to me over and over again through the episodes that we've had so far.
No doubt. It sounds like a powerful platform.
No question. I'm thankful that I'm able to have it and create it for folks.
No doubt, no doubt. So for our listeners who may want to listen and check it out, where can it be found at?
Oh, it's everywhere. So iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. You go on my website, marlonpeterson.com, and you can find all the episodes there as well.
Okay, no doubt. And I'm going to make sure to add another a link to it everywhere that this podcast is posted as well.
Please do. Please do. I appreciate that. And likewise with your podcast.
No doubt. I appreciate that, my man. So as a man who has been incarcerated and decarcerated, what do you believe the criminal justice system in your state is doing right, and what is it doing wrong?
You said in New York State?
Yeah, the state, yeah.
Oh, okay. There's a couple of things. I think we've made strides in reducing the amount of people in state prison in New York, and that's through, I think, largely because the amount of people who are formerly incarcerated who are now home and being able to sort of like be the voices of what policy looks like in terms of how we can reduce the amount of people in prison, but also people in the community are playing a big role in preventing people from getting there in the first place. You know what I mean? I think, there's a mentor of mine, he passed away, Eddie Ellis. He did 25 years himself. And he would always say that there are no prison problems, there are only community problems. And that's not to say that there aren't unique problems to prison. Of course there are, obviously. But to say that, but what he's really saying is that whatever problems we have in prisons are microcosms of what we have going on in our communities. And within the last 20 years or so, particularly in New York, there's been a upshot of people who are formerly incarcerated in positions of leadership, influencing what programming looks like, whether it comes from the educational system, dealing with the school-to-prison pipeline, to social services, to actually legislation, things such as ban the box and gaining access to higher education. I think all these roles have played a role, particularly in New York State, in terms of how we've been able to both reduce incarceration population, as well as reduce the level of violent crime in New York State. New York City particularly, there's still much more to go because, as you said, that's a state facility. That's not the same with the federal system, obviously other state facilities, and it definitely doesn't address the increase in people being held in immigration detention.
Indeed. What do you attribute your post-prison successes to?
I mean, people looked out for me, man. I mean, I think I was able to, first my family, I think, being able to have somebody to write to pick up a phone call and to visit you every couple of months, I think that was important for me to see. I always say that it's important that while you're inside, if you can have somebody to lean on outside, not necessarily for financial reasons necessarily, but just to have that emotional support.
That's a big deal. I was
able to look outside a person. That was important. But outside of that, while I was inside, I was able to earn a college degree through correspondence. The state didn't offer free college, so I had to pay for it. But I came for that even after I came home, But that was the role. I think while I was inside, I also was a part of. I ran what was called the Transitional Services Center in the jail I was at for the last 4 or 5 years I was there, and we basically prepared other men for their release. And by preparing other folks, I prepared myself. And so by the time I came home, which was in 2009, I had a plan for how I wanted my life to look.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that was through interacting with other folks on the outside as well as folks inside, giving me some energy and some advice. So when I came home,
it sounded like you took responsibility for your future.
Oh, well, I had to, man. I was thankful. In a weird way, you could say thankful. I only served 10 years. I could have served a lot more than 10 years.
Right.
So I think that, I came home at 30, going on 31, went in at 19, and I think that, I realized, how serious life is, and that it's not so much I didn't want to repeat. I want to say this point. Not so much I didn't want to repeat. I didn't want to go back to jail. I wasn't looking at it from that standpoint. I was looking from the standpoint that there's so much more for me to contribute to this planet, and I need to be out here to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I just focus on that.
Well, when I went through my own transformation, one of the main things that I was making my rules and my personal rules and responsibilities is what I see when I look in the mirror. I gotta see something specific when I look in the mirror, and if it's something that when I look in this mirror that I don't like, then I have to do away with it. So at some point, you get to a point where what you see when you look in the mirror and what you see in the mirror, how that contributes to yourself, to the world, to the family, it begins to mean something. You agree with that?
Oh, no question. I mean, the mirror is the most honest space in the world.
Absolutely. No doubt. I dig how you articulated that. So tell me from your perspective, how do you understand mass incarceration? You understand the numbers. You've been through the system. You've been incarcerated and decarcerated. So you understand it. So from your perspective, how you think America has gotten itself into this situation? How you think it's gotten here?
Well, we decided to come here and take people's land. That's how we started it. Many audience are familiar, hopefully, with the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and that speaks to the lineage and the connection between Jim Crow and slavery and Jim Crow to mass incarceration now, as it exploded in the 70s, 80s, and 90s into 2.3 million now.
Right.
I think that America. The system of mass incarceration is intentional. We got here by intention. It wasn't by mistake. We decided to vote for and vote for people and vote for legislation that increased the amount of people in prison. But also, before we think about incarceration, we also voted for legislation and people who were invested in social disorganization of poor communities, particularly poor communities of color, but also poor white rural communities as well. We invest in the social disorganization of these communities and disinvest from these communities. So when you do that sort of thing, people are left to their own laurels, and usually because they don't have enough resources.
Other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
Please continue.
Yeah, they make decisions that are in their best interest and usually in many cases harm themselves, which can lead to issues of incarceration. So we've been very intentional, and I think that spending this period of time now. Just one thing for the audience, I want to give a real-life example of what I just said, and to move on, is that right now we are taking a public health approach to the opioid epidemic in this country, right? We're not thinking that jail was the answer. When you go back 30, 40 years ago, when mass incarceration was booming, the way we handled the issue of addiction was that we incarcerated people. We made intentional choices to use the criminal justice system as a resource for opioid addiction, right? That was an intentional way to sort of increase the population of people in prison. Now we're doing it differently. I'm just saying that the decisions that we've made in the past, the intentional decisions we've made as a country has led to the issue of mass incarceration, and we have to be just as intentional to reduce the amount of people in prisons and jails in this country, and also to reduce the amount of social disorganization in poor communities.
Acknowledging that is an intent, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do. Because I think a lot of people don't want to accept it. A lot of people don't want to see that. But it's obviously intentional. Ain't no question about it.
Yeah, no question. Particularly thinking about black and brown folks, it's obvious. Even going back to opioids, we didn't look at crack the same way. When crack was communities, black and brown communities, we were intentional. We were going to put these black and brown people away. And in fact, we were going to label their children crack babies. By labeling an entire community, a next generation of people who we don't feel like will have no hope, right? We were intentional about doing that, particularly for black and brown people. So, we have to be just intentional. We have to be honest about these things. We can't
we can't change an intent until we acknowledge the intent. You know what I'm saying? You can't be transformed. We're not having the right conversation. We're not having real, effective conversations until we, at a minimum, acknowledge that that the whole structure has an intentional diagram. You know what I mean? So it's no question about it. And that brings me to my next question. What do you believe are the first steps toward complete prison reform in America? What's the first things that we need to do?
Well, I think I recently gave a TED Talk, as you mentioned, and, it speaks about personal experiences, but particularly about violence. I went to jail for crime related to violence. But in the talk, I speak about the importance of investing in people, right? Investing in people, and particularly in the most marginalized spaces within our countries. And I speak about, Get Out from Brooklyn, communities where have been plagued generationally with a lack of resources. And I think the way to start, think about from a preventative space, is to have sustainable long-term investment in communities. Would that be in the educational system? Usually I'm thinking about prevent people from getting into that space in the first place. But once again, and that's on the front end. I think on the back end, I think we need to be thinking about a couple of things: criminal justice reform, human justice reform, as I like to call it, is not dichotomizing between nonviolent and violent folks. Like, we got to be realistic that the same trauma that people who have experienced, who have committed nonviolent crimes, are shared by people who committed or in jail for violent crimes. Right? And we're not excusing people for committing any sort of these crimes, but we have to first of all think about, if we want to realistically reduce the amount of people in prison, we have to be looking at both people who committed violent and nonviolent offenses. Right? I think that's one of the first things. I think in terms of one of the things that more states are allowing funding, or at least more colleges, private institutions are funding higher educational programs in prison. I think we all know statistically that education is a path to freedom, at least mentally and definitely physically eventually. And I think that institutional investment of higher education in all facilities is important, and it's cheaper. You know what I'm saying?
And, ain't it? No doubt about it.
And then thirdly, I think really being serious about mental health. Concerns of people in prison is another thing. I mean, prison, I'm sure you're still in. There's many folks who are probably in prison who have mental issues who should not be in a cell. Right? That's only accentuating the problems that they have, the emotional instabilities that they have, or clinical instabilities that they have. Right? So, those sort of things are ways in which we can be realistic about reducing the amount of people in prison. But ultimately, I'm going to say straight up that, it's not so much about this reform. I don't believe that prisons work, period. Right? I just do not believe that it works. I definitely, there are people who do harm and need to be restrained from committing further harm to other people and to themselves. But prisons don't fix it. Anybody that is able to triumph and be successful in prison is despite prison, not because of it. Right? There's the environment doesn't encourage self-development. It doesn't. People have to figure out in spite for that.
No, it just feels good. It just feels good. It just feels good to the politicians and to some members of the public. And to some of it just feels good. It doesn't work, you're right. But it feels good.
Absolutely, it's like how you sweep stuff under the rug.
Right.
Who cares? Until it happens to me or a family member, who gives a F? And even the thing is that even for folks who have family members, and I've experienced myself personally, just being straight up, people say, well, you're not like the other people inside of this. And to me, that's hugely problematic when we can just sort of separate, well, you're my family member, you're not like the other people inside of this place. Because ultimately, the next family is saying the same thing to their son or their daughter. You know what I mean? Or husband or wife or whatever it is.
No doubt. Ain't no question about it. No question, man. Hey, you made a lot of valid points, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you again for coming on and taking the time to have the discussion with me. So I think this conversation will be insightful and enlightening to a lot of people, man. And so thank you, man. Thank you for coming on. Unfortunately, our time, it's a 20-minute time period, man, but I get the feeling we could have this conversation for hours.
I'd like to connect to have you on. Yeah, I like to amplify your voice, so we'll work on that through whatnot. But I like to, folks need to get, what you're doing is amazing, bro. And I'm gonna applaud you for that, raise you up for that, bro. Thank you for this.
I appreciate that. So let's work together. Definitely, we can work together, man. And I personally hope that this is the beginning of a friendship, man, and we can do a lot of good things together. Again, thank you.
No question.
Thank you for coming on, taking the time. And to our listeners, I'd like to invite you to this podcast to share your story, your voice. I'd like to highlight your organization and any upcoming events that your organization may be having. The Incarcerate US podcast producer can be reached at incarcerateus.com. That's incarcerateus.com. And please remember that alone we are powerful, no doubt, but together we are unstoppable. This is Dante signing off with the Incarcerate US podcast, the place where all of our voices come together.
You have 1 minute left. The caller has hung up.